The House Committee on Education will come to order. Will the clerk please take attendance?
Chair Colazar.
Here.
Representatives Churches.
Present.
Shannon.
Present.
Weiss.
Here.
Glanville.
Present.
Conlon.
Here.
Edwards.
Here.
Wagella.
Here.
Green. Markkinen.
Here.
Paquette.
Here.
Wenzel. Johnson.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have 12 members present. You have a quorum.
Thank you. Today I am proposing an additional committee rule regarding testimony to clarify our procedures. You each have a copy of the proposed rule at your seat. And with that, Representative Churches moves to adopt the committee rule. Will the clerk please call the roll?
On the motion to adopt, Chair Colazar.
Yes.
Representatives Churches.
Yes.
Shannon.
Yes.
Weiss.
Yes.
Glanville.
Yes.
Conlon.
Yes.
Edwards.
Yes.
Wagella.
Yes.
Green. Markkinen.
Yes.
Paquette. Wenzel. Johnson.
Pass.
Mr. Chair, you have 8 yeas, 0 nays to pass. The new rules are adopted.
Thank you. Representative, I need a motion to excuse absent members. Want to make that motion? Representative Johnson makes that motion. And also Representative Conlon moves to approve the minutes of the February 13th committee without objections, so ordered. Today we will be hearing from Representative Arbit on House Bill 5025. So is he with us yet? Or he did, okay, in that case we will go at ease. Okay, the committee will come back to order. Representative Arbit, your bill, House Bill 5025, is up.
Good morning, Chair Colazar, Vice Chair Churches, Minority Vice Chair Green, and committee members. Mr. Chair, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify on behalf of my bill, which should go a long way to preventing significant harm not only in my community, but in communities all across the state. I'm incredibly proud to represent the city of Keego Harbor. Sandwiched on an isthmus between two lakes bordering West Bloomfield, Waterford, and Pontiac, Keego Harbor is the third smallest city in Michigan, all of a half a square mile, with roughly 2,700 residents. But whatever Keego Harbor lacks in size, it makes up for in warmth, spirit, and the grit and tenacity of its diverse people. The historic heart of this tiny city is the imposing and beautiful Roosevelt School. Built in 1920, 104 years ago, Roosevelt School is an archetype of the pre-Depression progressive era architectural style and was, until 2021, the oldest continuously operating school building in Oakland County. Naturally, residents of Keego Harbor are proud of Roosevelt School, not only for its architectural beauty, but for its sentimental value, the history and memories contained within its century-old walls. Many of my constituents have referred to Roosevelt as the beating heart of Keego Harbor. So as the West Bloomfield School District has embarked upon a consolidation of school buildings leading to the decision to decommission Roosevelt as an active school, there has been great passion and interest from residents, municipal leaders, and local developers as to how to repurpose the building to serve the needs of the community. Last fall, to the shock and dismay of my constituents, the West Bloomfield School Board voted to demolish the Roosevelt building rather than put it up for sale to be redeveloped. The reason for seeking to raise this iconic century-old landmark? Public Act 98 of 2017, also known as the Educational Instruction Access Act. The Educational Instruction Access Act prohibits local governments, school districts, and ISDs from placing a deed restriction on any educational property they intend to sell, if that deed restriction is intended to prevent the property from being used as an educational institution, such as a charter academy, parochial school, or private school. It is essentially the educational equivalent of banning non-competes. While this act originated to support the expansion of charter and private schools by giving those institutions an easier path to acquire former public school buildings, there's not a single shred of evidence to suggest that the law has succeeded in doing so. In fact, it's been a massive failure. In the wake of the Act's passage, there has been a widespread adoption of so-called demo, don't sell policies by school boards across the state of Michigan, wherein school districts opt to demolish the vacant buildings rather than allowing the state to force their hand and sell to competitors. So the law has failed to achieve its main purpose. Whether you support or oppose that goal, I have great news for you. Repealing the Educational Instruction Access Act will not in any way strengthen or weaken school choice. Instead, it is about preventing the litany of truly terrible consequences the Act has created for communities across the state of Michigan. First, it is fiscally irresponsible for districts to spend money on demolition of structurally sound buildings rather than exploring all options to sell and recoup taxpayer investments. That is the twisted incentive structure created by the Educational Instruction Access Act. In our research, we've discovered that many of the buildings recently demolished by school districts have been historically significant buildings, with many having stood for over 90 years. These buildings have long histories and aesthetic qualities that contribute greatly to the formation of communal identities. Demolishing them destroys their legacy and robs our state of its historic heritage. Unfortunately, Roosevelt School in Keego Harbor is far from the only historic gem to fall victim to this failed statute. Historic school buildings from Benton Harbor to Lansing to Waterford to Oak Park to Detroit have all been demolished due to the demo don't sell policies incentivized by this act. Second, we all know that we face severe crises in housing and childcare across Michigan. There has been significant success in converting former school buildings into multifamily housing, childcare centers, senior centers, and community centers, but these redevelopments are made all but impossible by so many districts adopting demo don't sell. Repealing the Educational Instruction Access Act will remove a massive barrier to repurposing historic buildings to meet today's needs. One final point. The negative ramifications of this act are only going to intensify in the coming decades. With Michigan's school-age population projected to decline through at least 2050, school districts will continue to consolidate operations across fewer buildings, leaving more vacant schools that could fall victim to the negative incentives of the law. Sadly, I don't know whether passing this bill will end up saving Roosevelt School in my district from the wrecking ball. But having witnessed this issue boiling over in my district for the past year, I want us to ensure that no other community has to endure what my constituents in Keego Harbor have had to endure. It is a travesty in its pointlessness. It is gut-wrenching and painful and entirely preventable. I am sure that this sad state of affairs is not what the original sponsor intended with this bill. Mike Shirkey is many things, but I doubt he'd like to be known as the Grim Reaper of historically significant school buildings. So let's repeal this act. Let's remove the statutory straitjacket placed on school districts and municipalities that has resulted in such tremendous loss to Michigan's historical inheritance. Because, colleagues, today it is Keego Harbor, but tomorrow it could be Trenton, or Richmond, or Lake Odessa, or Niles, or Houghton, or Walker, and honestly, it probably will be. So let's get rid of this pointless failed law. If you support public schools, vote to repeal this act. If you support local control, vote to repeal this act. If you support historic preservation, if you support fiscal responsibility, if you support addressing the housing crisis, if you support, then vote to repeal this act. And finally, if you support school choice, then vote to repeal this act, because it has done nothing, and I repeat, nothing, to expand school choice and everything to harm local control, historic preservation, and community identity. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm happy to take any questions now from members of the committee.
Thank you, and thank you for your testimony, Representative. Do you have a ballpark idea of how many schools have been demolished due to this?
I have the list. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but I'm happy to provide the committee with the list.
Okay, appreciate it. Any questions from committee members? Representative, or you're just pointing to someone else? Representative Paquette on Zoom.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the testimony here. Do you have, this is something I guess I don't have the details on, but do you have, I guess, the numbers from school boards who've made the decision to demolish if they had the opportunity, I guess, to repurpose or resell the building to a charter school academy, what have you? Are those numbers available, or could we track them down? Are you privy to them, specifically with regard to those demolishing decisions being made by the school board? Did they have other options or other educational institutions that wanted to acquire these buildings?
So I don't know. I mean, unless, going through all the minutes of all the school boards, I don't know that we actually would be able to find that data. We've done significant research in terms of, which one. I mean, there's been a lot of media reports around a lot of these, especially the ones that have been contentious, and finding sort of the similar arguments as to, well, why don't you just redevelop this? Well, we're worried about a charter school coming in and competing with our district and taking away funds or a private school or whatever. So I can't exactly quantify it for you, Representative, but I know that this has been a very durable trend that we've seen in school demolitions across the state.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Arbit. I agree. It's grievous that we're demolishing schools, especially a beautiful historical one such as the one in Keego Harbor. I'm a little bit concerned, though. Are we trading one straitjacket for a different one? Could we take all the straitjackets away and just have the freedom to allow this to be a non-school purpose, or a school for the blind, or a special ed needs school? Can't it be anything?
Yeah, and I mean, I'm certainly happy to talk about other potential solutions. I mean, for me, I'm not super concerned about what happens to the fate of these buildings. I feel like that's beyond not knocking them down, right? I think that should be up to the community, right? And to me, one of the things I think is really important about this is that it has really made the local communities not be able to decide, right, by putting a straitjacket on them. So, I think that what citizens have to do is hold their school districts as well as their local municipalities accountable for what they'd like to see these happen to these buildings. And if the answer isn't, if they don't want to place, if they feel that, it could be, like you said, a special, ed school, or a school for, people with disabilities, then maybe a derestriction isn't the answer, right? But I think those discussions and those decisions have to be a case-by-case basis, but I hear you.
So it sounds like we're in agreement on that. Maybe that could be an amendment here, that it really could be.
I'm happy to work with you and talk it through, for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. Representative Conlon.
Thank you, Representative, for this testimony. My school turned 100 years old, my elementary school in Ann Arbor, and I got to go there, and it's wonderful. It does need serious renovation that they're trying to do now. So there is the cost of keeping these buildings and renovating. But I guess to Rep. Johnson's point, so you're not against if the local group allows it, a charter school or independent school, to go into that space?
I'm not. I'm just saying that every school district should be able to have the choice as well as the local municipality. Right now, this basically makes it so there's no choice involved. And again, this is not an anti-charter bill. This is not a pro-charter bill. This is about ameliorating the negative consequences, the ramifications that I believe were unintended as a result of this legislation. So I think that we were fine before it. And charter schools were able to operate, public schools were able to operate before this law. What I think it has had, it was kind of a gratuitous law, I think, to support, charter schools. And whether you agree or disagree with that, it hasn't helped them, but it has hurt a number of other things. And I think that's the thing. It's sort of like a cherry on top, and we can get rid of it and, go back to the way it was before the law, and we'll all be fine. So.
Thank you. On Zoom, Vice Chair Green.
Thank you, Chair Colazar. I have a question. I just don't understand why the school boards are demolishing good buildings when they don't have to, because from my understanding, they have every opportunity to sell them or repurpose them, that this act is not holding them back from that. So I guess I'm confused as to why then the school boards are demolishing these historic buildings versus selling them or repurposing them. Thank you.
Thanks, Representative. And I appreciate the question. And I'm not here today to defend the actions of the school boards. I'm just here to, I guess, shine a light on the fact of how they have responded to this law, which is that the fear of charter schools coming into these vacant buildings to compete with the public schools has resulted in them taking these actions pretty widespread across the state. Right or wrong, we can say that was a good decision or a bad decision, or agree with them or disagree with them. That is what's happening. And I want to repeal this law because I don't think that should even be a consideration, right? And so I'm trying to deal with reality as it is, and the reality as it is, right or wrong, agree or disagree. This is how many school boards have responded, and I'd like to remove that as a consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Wagella.
Hi, Representative. First off, just thank you for bringing this forward. I think this is important for several reasons. I know you haven't talked about this, and I don't expect you to, but I will. To me, the intention of this law originally was to weaken our public school system, to handcuff them. And I think undoing that will, because demolishing buildings is extremely expensive, right? And being able to repurpose them or sell them, it could be a benefit. So I think just for conversation purposes, I think it's important. Are you aware of any other industry, public or private, that doesn't have the discretion to refuse to sell to their competitors? Because I think that's a highly unique thing that we don't generally see across our economy.
Thank you, Representative. I'm not, but that's a very interesting question, and I will definitely look into it. But I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. No further questions. Thank you very much, Representative.
Thank you.
Okay, we do have a few members of the audience that do wish to speak. Just want to level set before we begin that I ask that speakers limit their testimony to 5 minutes. After that, we will give committee members the opportunity to ask questions, but in terms of the testimony prior to that, we ask that you keep it to 5 minutes. And with that, I would welcome up Dan Quisenberry from MAPSA, also coming up with Kyle Smitley. Is it Smitley? Smitley, I apologize, from Detroit Prep. And they are wishing to speak opposing the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Dan Quisenberry with the Michigan Charter School Association. Yes, this is Kyle Smitley, who is the founder of 2 charter schools in the city of Detroit. And I want to let her speak to the importance of this bill and why we oppose the removal of those of the prohibition on the deeds.
Thank you, everyone. I wanted to share more about what life was like before, in my neighborhood in the city of Detroit, before the bill was enacted. I had a tiny little charter school that was located in the wing of an old church in the neighborhood of Pingree Park. We found this beautiful old abandoned elementary school. It had been abandoned for 10 years. There's no electrical. I thought it was the most beautiful building I'd ever seen. It's 100 years old. It had exactly the correct number of classrooms, and it needed $7 million of work. I fell in love with it. There was a deed restriction on there that the Detroit Public Schools had put in place saying that it had to be residential, it used for residential purposes. That was an illegal. That deed restriction is the exact type of restriction that this bill or the law that's on the books now seeks to make illegal, or has made illegal, rather. Just that you cannot restrict a use of a school building for uses that are to prohibit schools. Okay. So it was perfect. Classrooms. It was built for classrooms. It was built for kids. It was built to be an instructional facility. We were able to purchase it because the bill was in place. We were able to raise all of the money, get all of the financing. It's my life's work. And then we opened in 2019 with kindergarten and third grades in that beautiful building. It then went on to be the first public school ever featured by Architectural Digest because it's in this big, beautiful building. We've been talking a lot about how much we all like these big, huge historic buildings. Then, now, as we speak here today, it is full of 450 students, including my own child, at a free public charter elementary school, learning and happy. I think it's important to restate the notion of harm. Before we opened the building, it was 50,000 square feet of blight. It was a source of crime. The neighbors were devastated. When we opened the building, the next week, we invited all of the neighbors and the alum. These big old school buildings, everyone knows, they're neighborhood hubs. They're neighborhood institutions. You retired from there. Your kids went there. We invited the entire neighborhood. All the alumni came and filled the building. There was resounding public support. So it's, I think, important to realize, to reframe the notion of harm as being present when there is a big, huge, empty building that is being restricted from people who want to use it and repurpose it to do what it was intended to do.
Yes, we're opposed to removing that restriction. Representative Arbit was talking about allowing freedom for the community to use historic assets. Allowing a bureaucratic district official to put a restriction on it is actually the opposite of what's there is intended. So yes, we oppose it because schools can be repurposed as potential schools if that's what the community wants. And there are hundreds of illegal deed restrictions already on these buildings, so we need this law in place so they can be removed in the few cases where that's actually what the community wants. And Kyle is a perfect example of that. So we do oppose it. The worst thing we should be doing is restricting the use of public assets for public purposes.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Representative Johnson.
Thank you for sharing and inspiring us with that story that we can do everywhere else if we need to. To be clear, what you are saying is that to repeal this law is restricting us in being able to use these buildings for educational purposes if the local community wants to do that, correct?
Yes. There's a lot of double negatives in here. So repealing a restriction, you don't want to allow single organizations like a school district superintendent. I support school district superintendents, but if they put deed restrictions on there, it can fly in the face of what everyone else in the community wants to do with that public asset. Assets that taxpayers have paid for and might have to repay for if they have to recreate assets. So this is removing, not allowing them to restrict the use of a public asset.
So instead of repealing this, we could encourage to consider not demolishing these beautiful buildings.
Yes.
We could go in that direction. And like I said, I agree with Representative Arbit. I agree with the effort to keep good buildings in good standing that we have paid for, invested in. They're part of the community, part of the history. That would be a better direction than repealing this, correct?
There's nothing in the current law that prohibits people from using it for all the purposes they want to and saving buildings. Why do people make decisions to demolish a public asset? Makes no sense to me under any circumstance. The current law doesn't require them to do that.
Thank you. Representative Wagella.
Hi, I have two questions, and I think kind of points I want to make here. But first off, I think one of my questions was going to be, why don't school districts want to sell to charter schools? And then you said you couldn't figure out why they would ever demolish these buildings. So why do you think that is? Why would a school district not want to sell to a charter school? I think I know the answer, but I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Sure, go ahead.
School districts might not want to sell to a charter school because of a perceived sort of like competition. I think that's an outdated, antiquated, very binary way of looking at it. But I think that's sort of like the talking point.
I think that's super real though, right? Because you're taking enrollment and public school dollars, pure pupil funding from districts. I come from a district, Inkster's in my district. When the charter school cap was lifted, charter schools came in droves and pulled from the district, and we lost 100 kids in the matter of years, and the Inkster School District had to close. So my point is, I think the reason is obvious, right? And just like any business,
But it's not.
wouldn't want to.
Yeah,
Go
finish
ahead.
answering your first question. That's not the truth. There are as many examples of school districts that have sold buildings. Madison Heights and the Keys Grace Academy, a number of schools that are either in Highland Park or Inkster, because their main interest is making sure kids get an education and they can partner with charter schools. Why would you want to restrict the use of a public asset for public purposes?
And the second question I have is this, right? Or I guess I'll just make this point because I think it's really important for this discussion for the people in the room, people watching. School boards are elected, right? And so when we talk about bureaucrats making these decisions, we're talking about elected officials that have been chosen by their community to make these decisions. And I think that's a really important clarification point. Charter school officials are not necessarily elected, right? So I think that's an important thing just to point out. And
My response would be, that's great. There is democracy. Allow the community to make the decisions. Repealing this law, to your clarification, Representative Johnson, would allow people to make restrictions where the community could not do what they wanted to do.
The elected officials in the school
Exactly.
district could make those decisions that they were elected to do.
Representative Churches.
Thank you for being here today. I just have a situation in my community, and I just wondered what you think would happen in my specific instance. So I represent Downriver. We don't have any charter schools in my district, and that is kind of what my community supports. And I actually was in the school district yesterday, and there's one school that's been closed for a long time, and both the school district and the city have identified a need of our city to develop more affordable housing. So this school building has been converted to affordable housing. My concern would be the enrollment wouldn't support using that building for school because fiscally it wouldn't help the school district. But if a charter school wanted to land in Wyandotte instead, would this then restrict the rights of my school board and my city to make the best fiscal choice to develop and meet the needs of their community because they have to sell to a charter school that maybe is, there for their own reasons, trying to help kids, but also not meeting the needs specifically tailored to their community?
I'm obsessed with that question. Thank you so much. The answer is no. There would be nothing about the law forces any sort of a sale. Nothing about the law mandates like a higher use or priority or anything like that. The way in this exact example, which is really cool, it's this old building, it's affordable housing right now. Let's say I decided I want to be I want to make Downriver Achievement Academy, right? And I say, I want to go buy this building. They could say, no, go kick rocks. You can't make the numbers work, or even we just don't want to sell it to you. We don't want you here. There's no sort of requirement, force, priority, anything like that. All that is saying is that in this specific instance, if it's owned by a private owner, which is the affordable housing company. If your community said, man, we have a big group of parents, we want to open a charter school for the blind. We want to have a charter school for the blind or for students with special needs. We want to buy this building, and they made a good offer, and the private owner wanted to sell it to them, in their heart chose to sell it to them, that they would be allowed to do so. That's it.
And excellent answer and great question, Representative. Charter schools, there's a myth out there that somehow we're just opening up schools all over the state of Michigan. That's just not the facts. In the last 10 years, there's actually fewer charter schools in the state of Michigan. We have the exact same demographic issues that every other school in this state has, a declining population. So if you can't justify enrollment, there's no need for a charter school, and they don't open, and they won't go buy buildings to do that.
Thank you. And any Representative Johnson?
Thank you. To be clear, it is my understanding that charter schools only go where the community wants them. They've done surveys and polls in the community. One of these state universities partners with the charter school. Generally, this takes 2 to 4 years of a process of vetting the community, the parents, the state university approves of this charter school being in this place in the state of Michigan. Everybody has to approve it, and it takes roughly 2 to 4 years to go through the approval process, prove that the community wants it, et cetera. This is not any light matter, and if I'm clear, charter schools do not decide where they go.
That's right.
It is the community in partnership with the state of Michigan, in partnership with a state university that has the authority to designate and approve and design the charter schools with you, correct?
That's right. You've articulated it very well, Representative.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, agreed.
Representative Weiss.
Thank you. I just had a clarification question. So public schools, if a public school is to sell a building, whether it be to another charter private school or for another purpose, the money that comes back to the district from that sale is state dollars reinvested back into that public school system. If a charter school is to purchase a building with those same state dollars and then is to then later sell that building, what happens to those dollars?
If the public school, that the charter school is a public school, it's an LEA, so if it's
Yeah.
purchasing that facility, it's a public asset.
So what happens if it's purchased from a management company? What happens to the building once the building is sold? Like, what happens to the money that's made from the sale once the building's sold?
Any developer that might have any purpose in mind, it would go from a public asset, I would believe, to a private asset, but we could look at that more. The point would be that would still be a community decision on who's going to buy it and for what uses and where those assets
I'm not
are
even
gonna
asking
go.
about who's going to buy it and who buys it. I'm just saying the money that is
Well,
made from
who
the
buys
sale.
it is important and what their tax status is. But you wanted to say something?
I think a lot of these sales too, the deed restriction comes in not when it's like a traditional public school sale to a charter school. Typically, the deed restriction is at play. I believe in the instance in Kiko Harbor as well, where it's a traditional district selling to another entity, like a private developer who has a big dream, but then gets nervous with the dollars, who then sells to a public school academy. But then the restriction is the thing that causes the problems. But I think there's a lot of, as someone who manages the books for my charter school, we're audited super heavily in terms of like our state dollars and what we're doing. So speaking personally, we don't have a management company. We're a nonprofit public charter school. All of those dollars then are like, if we were to dissolve or we were to be sold, it would be like a state dollar audited tracked thing. It's not like it just evaporates into like a private
That makes sense for yours. So I'm talking about more in terms of specifically for management companies, not nonprofit charters, but management companies. If a building is sold for whatever purpose, what happens with the revenue that's made from that sale, and what method do we have of tracking that?
Question we could follow up more. I want to make sure I'm being precise, but generally, that's why I was trying to relate it to a developer. Let's say it's this building that's being talked about today is going to be used for housing, and a private developer comes and purchases it. it'll become a private asset, and the public is being paid for that. In the situation you're talking about, where there are some private companies that seek facilities for the use of a public charter school, it would become a private asset, I believe, at that point, but the public would be being paid for that. But you're not restricting the community from saying that's what we want to do. There's nothing in the current law that requires that. We're trying to make sure we don't put additional handcuffs on communities that might want to do that and explore. We'd like to sell this. We'd like the proceeds from it, and we're okay with the future purposes being this developer we're selling it to.
Yeah, thank you. I'm asking a slightly different question because I'm more interested in what happens with the tax dollar. Because obviously, tax dollars are used to purchase buildings, tax dollars are used to make investment in buildings, and once those buildings are sold, what happens? Where does that revenue go? I'd like a clear answer on that.
The current law would allow the public to decide what they want to do with that. Not being the repeal of this law would actually put greater restrictions on their own community use of it.
Well, it'd be up to their locals to decide that. Thank you.
Thank you. And no other questions. Thank you.
Chairman.
Okay, next up, wishing to speak and supporting the bill, Jen Rigterink and Melissa Milton Pung from Michigan Municipal League.
Morning, Chair and Committee. I'm Jen Rigtrink with the Michigan Municipal League, and this is my colleague, Melissa Milton Pung, and we are here in support of House Bill 5025. This bill is really not about charter schools. It's about local choice. I think you just heard from the folks that were up here testifying. It's about what does the community see as the highest and best use of a property. And right now, the bill has a deed restriction that benefits one stakeholder group. We see this sort of deed restriction right now on big box retail. And if any of you are familiar with the dark store phenomenon, where a large retailer is able to move to a new building, put deed restrictions on their old building, where basically nothing can come in. And so we are supporting that and allowing that to happen in situations. So why not allow for it really to be a local choice? And for when a school comes up, its highest and best use. Again, local choice are local decisions. And right now, who's handcuffed really are those local decision makers and what's the highest and best use. Any interested property owner that would be in it, if they fit the planning and zoning, if their site plan that they want to get approved, if that's something that fits what the community is already wanting and you're not going to allow it, you're going to see litigation. You're going to end up in the court. So there is a pathway for someone that wants a charter school if that's the highest and best use. And for some reason, they're just not allowing it. There are the courts, and we've seen many cases. Accountability. I think, Rep, you touched on that. School board officials are elected as well as that local governing body. And so if decisions aren't being made and what the community wants actually done, then you see those results and that accountability come in when those officials are back up for re-election going forward. I'm going to turn it over to Melissa to talk about her work. She's on the ground and working with our members all across the state. But this is an issue. I mean, we have a project right now in Harper Woods, beautiful school, and want to repurpose it into housing. But the school district is tearing it down because there's no guarantee there that if a development goes south, that building wouldn't be flipped over to the quickest person or property owner to come get it. And for some reason, whatever that reason is, they don't want to see that building repurposed into a charter school. So this is something that's happening across the state with school buildings.
Hi, I'm Melissa Milton Pung. I work in policy research labs at the Michigan Municipal League, and my team is charged with creating solutions for our members, the cities and villages of Michigan. We see people grappling with what do you do with these schools. So here's a couple of different points. While Roosevelt School in Keego Harbor and West Bloomfield Schools has brought us to testify today, the issue that has a broader impact on surplus school facilities statewide. That's been established here. The bill that we have before us, though, would enable a school district to divest itself from owning and maintaining educational facilities no longer in use while still addressing future land use. It would empower local school districts to provide a path for their resources to be pressed into service in a way that works best for each individual community. So the top 3 benefits of the bill before you are revenue. It would create an unimpeded avenue to place surplus education facilities onto the tax rolls with directed future land use, and let me emphasize, putting it back on the tax rolls for local municipalities. This revenue would allow communities to connect new uses to the existing infrastructure such as parks and pathways, roads, water, sewer, electricity, and broadband, already being put there, connecting to it, and generate new sources of taxes, like I said. This is especially important for our landlocked municipalities who have no place to grow. It would also have reuse for residential use. We've touched on it before, but let's talk about some actual demographics here in Michigan. We are getting older and more diverse. Our household sizes are getting smaller. So while we know that there is a declining population and a rising need for housing, put the numbers to it. 23% of Michigan households have children. 23%. There's only 2.48 people per household. So while our household numbers are getting smaller, our household need is getting bigger. That means housing is an urgent issue in most communities, and I bet you understand that in your gut. School buildings offer an excellent opportunity for multi-unit housing that has many precedents across the state. Lansing, Ypsilanti, you fill in the blank because you know them. Most educational facilities are located in neighborhoods where zoning focused on residential, houses of worship, and schooling already exists. House Bill 5025 poses an opportunity for housing creation within existing zoning. It doesn't tell you what to do, but it allows for that to occur. My office works closely with the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. We have provided support in more than 60 communities across the state, specifically for site redevelopment like this. And finally, my third point is retention. Enabling building reuse retains and reuses the embodied carbon already invested in buildings. It redeploys this facility for a new purpose and reduces wastes into landfills. It also retains local residents' emotional connection to place and visual continuity of a community landmark. Further commentary on this point is going from Janet Krieger, who is from the Michigan Historic Preservation Network. I'm on that board.
We have hit our time.
Thank you. We're available for any questions if you have them.
Anyone have any questions? Thank you very much. Okay, next up on Zoom, we have Carol Finkelstein. Oh, you're here. I'm sorry. Oh, I thought you were on Zoom. In that case, here in person, Carol, is it Finkelstein? Carol Finkelstein, the treasurer of West Bloomfield School District Board of Education.
I apologize. Esteemed chair and committee members, as mentioned, my name is Carol Finkelstein. I'm a 13-year member of the West Bloomfield Board of Education and current treasurer. I support House Bill 5025. Across Michigan, vacant historic school buildings with potential for redevelopment are sitting vacant or they're being torn down. The simple fact is that local school districts, private, parochial, and charter schools are all competing for a declining pool of students. I welcome competition, but too much competition means declining enrollment for all schools. The result is cuts to programming, fewer opportunities for kids, and closing more schools. My district's story is not unlike other districts across the state. In the past 15 years, our enrollment has declined by nearly 2,000 students. We are heavily reliant on school of choice to fill vacant seats. Over 30% of our current 4,800 students reside outside of our district boundaries. Yet, like other districts, we continue to face declining enrollment and building closures. Roosevelt is a beautiful 104-year-old historic building that is facing demolition because we simply cannot afford to have it become a competing school. This is the unintended consequence of the Educational Instruction Access Act. Through redevelopment into low-income housing, senior housing, condos, or mixed use, Roosevelt and other historic buildings across Michigan could have many more years of useful life while helping to address Michigan's housing shortage. While some vacant school buildings have been sold for redevelopment, those sales are not the norm. Here's why. If for whatever reason that redevelopment doesn't occur, school districts fear that a subsequent sale to a competing school will take students away. More often than not, schools have just avoided this possibility by demolishing their vacant school buildings and selling the vacant land. Historic designations may be able to save some of these beautiful old buildings from the wrecking ball, but a historic designation is a double-edged sword. A historic designation can place costly restrictions on redevelopment efforts by restricting architectural design and requiring historically accurate materials. It can restrict the highest and best use of a building. The Educational Instruction Access Act has failed. It has caused the needless demolition of useful and historic buildings, but there is a solution. Like many other beautiful historic buildings around the state, Roosevelt could be saved if our local school board could sell it with a deed restriction, and we have offers. Michigan schools are locally controlled. Decisions that impact our local communities belong in our hands, the hands of local elected officials. Local school boards must be allowed to determine how to best dispose of property that's no longer needed. Today, I respectfully request that you preserve our history, favorably report House Bill 5025, and give the bill immediate effect. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Any questions? Representative Johnson.
Thank you. As I'm looking around the state, I see many schools that have been turned into housing, apartment buildings, et cetera. So I'm a little confused as to how there's a restriction on making the buildings into housing when it's already the case.
There's not a restriction, but there is a fear. If, for example, and I'm going to use Roosevelt for the example, if we sold it to a developer and his rezoning or financing, whatever it is, fell through, there is a chance, because there's no deed restriction on that property, that he could flip it to a parochial school, to a private school, Montessori, or a charter. This isn't all about charters. This is about any competition. And we're closing the building because we don't have enough kids. So there isn't restriction on it becoming housing. But if I have two offers coming in for that property, and they're the same price, and one comes from a school, and one comes from redevelopment for housing, if I don't sell it the way this law is written, I don't have to sell it for their school, but I can't not sell it just because it's going to be a school. If I don't sell it for that school, we're going to court. We will be sued. Guaranteed, we will be sued. So, you know, we're backed into a corner here where we can't do what's best for the community and ensure that it does become housing, because we have this threat that a competing school could get that property. Does that answer your question, Representative?
Not really, because we're all arguing for choice and let the community decide, and you still want it to not be a school. That one choice should not be considered, only the other ones. That's not really fair choice to the community.
Well, but you know, if the folks from the charters made their case, but what hasn't been discussed here is the Montessori schools, the parochial schools, that they don't go through the same process. They can buy any property they darn well want to, and they can open up a school. They can move their school.
And the problem with that is what?
Again, they're going to be taking kids from the public schools and from the charters that are in our community. There are 20 charter schools in Oakland County. We're all competing for the same kids. So if now we're also losing to private schools and to Montessori schools and parochial schools, again, it's the same pool of kids.
Do you really believe they take kids from the parents and the communities, or they offer a choice when the community has asked them to come into the community and they're supportive?
Our community doesn't want any other competing school. They've made that abundantly clear. The community of Keego Harbor has made that abundantly clear.
Okay.
But again, the fear is still there that a charter school or a parochial school or another private school could pick up that property. And again, if our community says we want it to be a school for the blind, a school for the deaf, a school for the gifted, whatever it may be, great, let that happen. But again, let us decide that at the local level instead of here in Lansing.
Thank you. I appreciate that sentiment. Now, quick question for me. So you are a school board member.
I am.
So thank you for your service, first of all. That is a
Thank
thankless job. Secondly, does this law inhibit your ability as a locally elected official to make decisions for your local community?
100% it does.
Thank you.
It ties my hands, and I ask you to untie my hands.
Thank you. And with that, Representative Wagella.
Hi. First off, thank you for being a board member. Being a union president on the other side and having to sit through all those board meetings, I don't envy that. But then I look at my life now. Anyway, I think just to kind of frame this in a way, because I feel like sometimes it gets like put in a way that's not so simple, is, okay, let's say Representative Wagella had a bakery, right? And my bakery is doing well, and I own the property across the street. Can you imagine a situation where I would be forced into, I couldn't make the decision not to sell that property to another bakery that's going to compete with me and potentially put me out of business? That's what we're talking about here, right? Is that the correct way to look at this?
That is the correct way to look at this, Representative.
Thank you.
100%. Yep.
Thank you. We have one more question from Representative Weiss.
I had a similar question, so I'll pass. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Kristen Sonville Douglas. Did I say your name? Is it Sonville? Sonneville. I apologize. Kristen Sonneville Douglas from Save Roosevelt Community Action Group. I'm assuming to speak in support of the bill.
Yes.
Again, please remember to keep testimony to 5 minutes.
Sure will do. Yes. Good morning, Chair and community members. My name is Kirsten Sonneville Douglas, a resident of Keego Harbor, Michigan. When my husband and I had the opportunity to relocate to Keego Harbor, we loved the small town feel, and we jumped at the opportunity. And like many of us who are more conscious of our carbon footprint, walking or biking to our neighborhood school was a huge selling point. Prior to my son attending Roosevelt Elementary, we would ride our bikes to the community-funded and community-built playground on the Roosevelt grounds. There we enjoyed many hours of climbing, swinging, meeting new friends and neighbors. My son, as he grew older, realized that this would be his school, and every time we passed it, he'd proudly proclaim, "Look, Mama, there's my school." Fast forward to 2017, as a newer resident of Keego Harbor, we were encouraged to support a bond that would protect the elementary school, the focal point of our small little city. A bond that promised to keep Roosevelt, the oldest continuing operating school in Oakland County at the time, open, and would provide over $3 million to update the school. Of course, we would support it, and so we did. The following year, my son entered the kindergarten and were welcomed into the Roosevelt Husky Pack. In December of 2020, in the middle of a global pandemic, the school district presented a plan to close Roosevelt. The community spoke up against the plan, asking for the data that supported the closing and demanding equitable learning environments and opportunities for our community. Ultimately, the school district blazed forward and proposed a plan to demolish the historical Roosevelt School building. In the summer of 2023, the West Bloomfield School District held 4 community input sessions to gather information and feedback on the plan that included the demolition of the now vacant Roosevelt building. At each of these input sessions, the conference room was full. Hundreds of voices spoke out against the plan, and the community's message was crystal clear. If you have no use for the building, sell it and protect this 100-plus-year-old building. Our input was ignored, and on September 18th of 2023, the West Bloomfield School District Board of Education voted 5-2 to demolish the historical building, citing that it cannot protect themselves from a competitor if they sold the building. rationale that was based on a verbal legal opinion regarding a law and deed restrictions, and stated that the best plan forward was to demolish the building. My community hears our district concerns, and we have rallied to find solutions. Dr. Seuss said it best: unless someone cares like you an awful lot, nothing's going to get better. It's not. And this community cares, as it's demonstrated by their grassroots efforts. One community member engaged potential developers who have since submitted offers to purchase Roosevelt. Offers that were ignored because of this imaginary threat that the developer could turn around and resell the building to a competing school. The community engaged our Oakland County Commissioner, who proposed a non-binding resolution and was passed unanimously in committee. We've engaged historical societies like the Greater West Bloomfield Historical Society and the Oakland County Pioneer and Historical Society, who both support our efforts in saving this historical building that was built by Robert O'Derrick and who was once known as Henry Ford's favorite architect. We are thankful to the Michigan Historical Preservation Network for identifying a pattern of similar scenarios across Michigan and who has provided a legal opinion in support of preserving and repurposing historical school buildings. We have support from the City of Keiko Harbor and Orchard Lake, and many of the community members have been continuing to request at public comment that the West Bloomfield School Board of Education reconsider, and over 50 at the last 2 meetings specifically. The community and taxpayers have lost their voice. The school district has the ultimate power to destroy an asset that they don't need, and there isn't any recourse at the current time to stop the demolition. A decision that is based on a hypothetical fear, a fear that Bill 5025 can eliminate. I was born in Bruges, Belgium. There, one is surrounded by history. It is celebrated. Michigan students are required to take a set number of social studies courses that include world history and U.S. history. From these lessons, we asked our students to be critical thinkers. Students learn how they came to be and hopefully create better paths for themselves and their communities. The way the current law reads, it's being interpreted by my school district and other districts and threatens our local history. History that is saved and preserved provides a foundation for future generations. So today I ask you to help us. I ask you to preserve local history like Roosevelt School Building and other historical buildings. I'm asking you to please support the House Bill 5025 so that no other community has to go through what the Keiko Harbor community, my community, is going through. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Seeing no questions, thank you very much. Next up, and this is, I believe, our final speaker, is on Zoom. It is Janet Krieger, the president of the Michigan Historic Preservation Network.
Good morning, Chair and committee members. Can you hear me all right?
We can hear you.
Great. I'm Janet Krieger. I'm president of the Michigan Historic Preservation Network, the MHPN. The MHPN has worked for over 4 decades with Michigan communities to keep their historic buildings economically vital and on the tax rolls. These past years, we have noticed the loss of historic buildings that were perfect for reuse. Like no other building in a community, a school reflects its civic pride and the belief that education assures the future of the children. There is always public outcry when a school comes down, but they were coming down nonetheless. Now, to the MHPN, these losses were masked because plenty of Michigan communities are reusing their historic schools. They have ignored the impact of the law that we are trying to repeal. For example, along the I-75 corridor, the 1928 Coolidge School in Flint provides affordable and market rate housing, while Pontiac's 1920 Webster School is a community center. On the west side of the state, the 1929 Eastern Elementary School in Grand Rapids now provides affordable housing. In Detroit, the city is completing a groundbreaking study of 63 school buildings, all which they believe have development potential. In central Michigan, East Lansing converted its 1926 Hannah School into a community center over 20 years ago. In Northwest Michigan, the 1927 Clinton School in Charlevoix is the downtown library and community center and technology hub. And in the Upper Peninsula, we see the adaptive reuse of one of our smallest assets. That's the 1938 Hessel School as a community center and a museum for its less than 2,000 citizens in the city. In spite of these successes, here we were in Keego Harbor with the 1920 Roosevelt School facing demolition. One of our Oakland County developers brought the situation to our attention. He recognized the building's soundness and made an offer that was utterly ignored. Citizen outcries were ignored. The demand to do basic cost benefit analyses were ignored. So suddenly the MHPN is saying, what is going on here? So soon we learned there was a law of concern to the school boards. That's Public Act 98 of 2017, the Educational Instruction Access Act that we have been discussing today. This was giving rise to school boards demolishing buildings solely to prevent them from being purchased for an unwanted use or repurchased for an unwanted use. We soon learned that Representative Arbit and Senator Bayer were working on a House Bill 5025 to repeal the Access Act. MHPN is fully in support of the repeal because the damage is caused statewide. In closing, the MHPN stresses that historic schools are versatile economic tools. You've already heard that from the other speakers. They meet the governor's stated needs for housing at all price points for all age groups. They build authentic and walkable communities where you can bike to where you need to be. They keep older communities and their traditional downtowns vital. With your endorsement of House Bill 5025, you're not only helping Keego Harbor, but also communities throughout Michigan, because these irreplaceable buildings are everywhere. Thank you.
Thank
I'll
you.
take any questions.
Is any questions? Seeing no questions, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Okay, and with that, we do have cards to read in. Not wishing to speak, supporting the bill, Peter Spatafor, Michigan Alliance for Student Opportunity. Not wishing to speak, supporting the bill, Judy Allen, Michigan Townships Association. Not wishing to speak, supporting the bill, Dr. Cheryl Kennedy, Michigan Department of Education. Not wishing to speak, supporting the bill, Mike Latvis, Wayne Risa. Not wishing to speak, supporting the bill, David Randalls, Oakland Schools. Not wishing to speak, supporting the bill, Matthew Schuler, Michigan Association of Superintendents and Administrators. Not wishing to speak, supporting the bill, Tammy Danzer, Michigan Education Association. Not wishing to speak, opposing the bill, Beth Deschone, Great Lakes Education Project Education Fund. Not wishing to speak, opposing the bill, Jason Mancini, MCCSA. Not wishing to speak, opposing the bill, Melanie Masick, Mackinac Center for Public Policy. Not wishing to speak, opposing the bill, Paul, I'm going to try my best. I apologize if I mess this up. Paul Stankiewicz from Michigan Catholic Conference. Not wishing to speak, opposing the bill, Brian Broderick, Michigan Association of Non-Public Schools. And we have no position indicated on a card, but a card was issued from Michigan Association of School Boards. And in the front, we have a support. Thank you for that clarification. And with that, seeing no further business before the committee will stand adjourned. Thank you, everybody.